Australia is the driest inhabited continent on Earth. It is also one of the emptiest. Most Australians live crammed into a thin strip of coastline along the southeast corner of the country. And the moment you drive inland, the population thins out so fast, it almost feels like the land itself is pushing people away. Red dust stretches to every horizon. Flies swarm your face within 30 seconds of stepping out of the car. The silence is so complete it becomes a physical presence, something you can almost lean against. But people live out there. They always have. And some of the settlements they built in that silence are so strange, so defiant, and so completely cut off from everything that the rest of Australia would call normal, that you have to wonder what kind of person looks at the most hostile landscape on the planet and decides to stay. These are 10 of the weirdest and most isolated towns in Australia. Some are still alive, barely. Some are ghost towns that refuse to disappear. All of them will change the way you think about what it means to live somewhere. Number 10. Wittenoom, Western Australia. There is a town in the Pilbara region of Western Australia that the government has spent 50 years trying to erase from every map, every road sign, and every official record in the country. The town is called Wittenoom, and it sits roughly 1,100 kilometres north of Perth, in a landscape of ancient gorges carved from rock more than 2 billion years old. The gorges themselves are genuinely spectacular. Blue and ochre walls rising hundreds of metres above dry riverbeds, the silence broken only by wind and the occasional wedge-tailed eagle-riding thermals overhead. The rock formations date back more than 2 billion years, among the oldest exposed geology on the planet. In a different world, Wittenoom Gorge would be one of Australia's premier tourist destinations. But underneath the beauty, running through the geology in thick blue veins, is crocidolite, blue asbestos. And for nearly 30 years, a company called Australian Blue Asbestos mined it here without adequate protection for the workers, the families, or the thousands of tourists who came to visit the gorges through the 1950s and 60s. The mill waste, fine blue fibres, invisible to the naked eye, was used as landfill, spread on roads, dumped in playgrounds and gardens. Children played in it, families built homes on it, and for years, nobody in authority said a word. By the 1980s, the mesothelioma cases began to overwhelm the medical system. Mesothelioma is a cancer caused almost exclusively by asbestos exposure, and it is one of the most brutal ways a human body can fail. More than 2,000 people who lived or worked in Wittenoom have since died from asbestos-related diseases. The government degazetted Wittenoom in 2007, which means it officially removed the town from Western Australian law. Road signs were torn down, the postcode was cancelled, mail deliveries stopped. The government bought out most residents and demolished their homes. And yet a handful of people refused to leave, defying orders, living without services, without emergency response, without any official acknowledgement that their address even exists. When you drive through the Pilbara today, the old signs pointing to Wittenoom have been replaced with signs for Karijini National Park. The gorges are still there, the asbestos is still there, and somewhere in those red ranges, the ghost of a town that Australia desperately wants to forget is still breathing. Number 9. Marble Bar, Western Australia. Marble Bar has a reputation it has spent over a century either living up to or living down. It is officially the hottest town in Australia, and it earned that title without ambiguity. Between October 1923 and April 1924, Marble Bar recorded 160 consecutive days of temperatures at or above 37.8 degrees Celsius. Not once did the mercury drop below that threshold for nearly 6 months straight. The town sits in the East Pilbara, about 1,700 kilometres from Perth, in a landscape of exposed granite that absorbs heat all day and radiates it back through the night. There is almost no cloud cover. There is very little shade. The Coober River runs nearby, but for most of the year it is bone dry, a riverbed of white sand baking under a sun that feels twice as close as it should. The name comes from a bar of jasper that crosses the Coober River nearby. Early settlers mistook jasper for marble. By the time anyone corrected the error, the name had stuck. Gold was discovered in the region in the 1880s, and for a brief, chaotic period, Marble Bar was a booming goldfield settlement with hotels, a courthouse, and enough ambition to imagine a future. The future failed to materialize. The gold ran thin. The heat remained. Today, roughly 300 people live here, and the town survives because the surrounding stations and mines need a service point, and because the Ironclad Hotel, which opened in 1893, is still serving cold beer to anyone tough enough to make the drive. There is a kind of stubborn pride in Marble Bar you encounter almost nowhere else. The locals do not apologize for the heat. They discuss it the way other people discuss weather, casually, as a fact of life, rather than something worthy of alarm. When temperatures hit 48 degrees in the shade, and they do most summers without much drama, the conversation at the Ironclad tends to be about footy and cattle prices, rather than the fact that the air itself is trying to cook everyone standing in it. That is, if you can find anyone standing in it, rather than sitting in the shade with something cold. Number 8. Daly Waters, Northern Territory. Daly Waters is a place that should not exist, and yet there it is. 800 kilometers south of Darwin on the Stuart Highway, a town of approximately 20 permanent residents gathered around a pub that is arguably the most famous drinking hole in the Northern Territory. The Daly Waters pub has been licensed continuously since 1893. It was a critical stopping point for the Overland Telegraph Line, a staging post for cattle drovers moving enormous mobs across Queensland to the northern ports, and later one of the first refueling stops for early international aviation routes from England to Australia. Aviators, including Amy Johnson and Charles Kingsford Smith, landed at the Daly Waters Aerodrome in the 1930s. The aerodrome is still there, a flat red strip of gravel surrounded by spinifex and ghost gums. The pub itself is a monument to Outback tradition. The walls, ceiling, and every available surface are covered in objects that travellers have left behind over more than a century. Bras, banknotes from 100 countries, business cards, hats, flags. The collection has no official curator, no coherent theme, and no apparent end. Between April and October, Daly Waters fills with caravanners doing the big lap of Australia, retirees who have decided to drive around the entire continent. For 6 months of the year, the pub can serve several hundred people a night, and the campground becomes a small city of white vans and folding chairs. Then the wet season arrives. The road north floods. The temperature climbs into the high 30s, with humidity that makes the air feel like warm soup, and Daly Waters goes back to being 20 people and the accumulated memory of everyone who ever passed through and left a piece of themselves on the wall. Number 7. Silverton, New South Wales. If Silverton looks familiar, that might be because you have already seen it. The ghost town, 25 kilometres northwest of Broken Hill, in far western New South Wales, has served as a filming location for Mad Max 2, The Road Warrior, A Town Like Alice, Mission Impossible 2, and dozens of other productions that needed a landscape that looked convincingly like the end of the world. Silverton sits on the edge of the Barrier Ranges, where the landscape has been stripped back to something raw and geological, gibber plains stretching to a horizon broken only by low rocky ridges, and the occasional bleached trunk of a dead mulga tree. The light here is extraordinary, harsh and flat in the middle of the day, then turning everything gold and rust in the hour before sunset. Silver was discovered at Silverton in 1882, and for a period in the mid-1880s, the town had a population of around 3,000 people. There were newspapers, hotels, a hospital, a school of mines, and enough optimism to sink a shaft. Then the ore ran out, and Broken Hill absorbed everything that mattered. By 1889, Silverton was functionally finished. What remains today is a population of around 40 people, 3 pubs, an art gallery, a camel farm, and a jail museum that opened in 1889 and now holds photographs from Silverton's brief, Furious Prime. The Mad Max Museum is exactly what it sounds like, a room of vehicles, costumes, and props maintained by a local enthusiast who has made post-apocalyptic cinema his life's work. On any given weekend, more people visit Silverton than actually live there. Artists have been coming since the 1980s, drawn by the light and the sense that time stopped here on a specific afternoon in 1889 and simply never resumed. Number 6. Tibooburra, New South Wales. Tibooburra is so far from everywhere that even by the standards of Outback, New South Wales, it qualifies as extreme. The town sits in the corner country of the state, where New South Wales meets Queensland and South Australia in a junction of red sand, spinifex, and granite boulders. The nearest major town is Broken Hill, 330 kilometres to the southwest, across the Sturt Stony Desert. About 150 people call Tibooburra home. There are 2 pubs, which is a remarkable pub-to-person ratio even by Australian standards. The Family Hotel and the Tibooburra Hotel both have historic significance, and both have walls covered in the work of Brushmen of the Bush, a group of Outback artists who painted murals directly onto the pub walls in the 1970s. Walking into either pub is like stepping into a gallery, except someone will immediately hand you a cold beer. The surrounding Sturt National Park covers more than 300,000 hectares of outback landscape, including the Jump-Up Country, a series of dramatic mesa formations that rise from the desert floor without much warning, and Corner Country itself, where a simple surveyor's marker in the middle of a flat red plain marks the point where 3 states meet. Tourists drive for days specifically to stand with 1 foot in each state, which is the kind of modest ambition that the Outback tends to inspire. Number 5. Oodnadatta, South Australia. The Pink Roadhouse is what most people know about Oodnadatta before they arrive. It is painted the colour its name suggests, an intense bubblegum pink that stands out against red dust and blue sky, with a visibility you could probably spot from low orbit. The Roadhouse sells fuel, food, tyres, ice, and hope to travellers driving the Oodnadatta track, one of Australia's most iconic outback roads, and also one of its most unforgiving. Oodnadatta sits roughly 900 kilometres north of Adelaide, with a population around 250, including a significant proportion of Arabana people, for whom this country has been home for tens of thousands of years. The town sits on the edge of the Great Artesian Basin, the enormous underground reservoir that makes life possible across a vast area of Central Australia. The mound springs that bubble up from the basin around Oodnadatta have been used by the Arabana people as water sources and ceremonial sites for longer than written history reaches. The old narrow-gauge Garn railway line passed through Oodnadatta for decades, making it a railhead and staging point for camel trains heading further into the desert. When the railway rerouted in 1980, Oodnadatta lost the reason most people had ever had for stopping. The Oodnadatta track is only partially sealed, and in wet conditions it becomes impassable, cutting the town off from the south for days or weeks at a time. The Pink Roadhouse keeps records of every vehicle that signs in before attempting the track and signs out again on arrival at the other end, a system born from the knowledge that people die out here when their plans fail and nobody knows they are missing. The staff at the Pink Roadhouse have coordinated search and rescue operations more times than they care to count, and they will tell you about those incidents without much sentimentality, because sentimentality does not help when someone's car is buried to the axles in bull dust 60 kilometres from the nearest phone signal. Number 4. Lightning Ridge, New South Wales. Lightning Ridge is the black opal capital of the world. Australian black opals, found almost nowhere else on the planet, come in colours so vivid that photographs rarely do them justice. A single stone can hold red, green, blue, gold, and purple simultaneously, shifting as you turn it in the light. The finest stones sell for hundreds of thousands of dollars, and this has attracted a very particular type of person. The miners who work the Lightning Ridge fields tend to be deeply independent, suspicious of authority, and committed to a lifestyle that involves digging holes and living in whatever structure they can assemble around those holes. Many residents live in dugouts or self-built homes of unusual construction, using sheets of iron, timber, and whatever materials happened to be available when the need arose. The town has around 2,000 permanent residents, but the surrounding opal fields are populated by an unknown number of fossickers and long-term believers living in caravans and improvised camps. The local council has famously struggled to maintain any regulatory relationship with the mining community, many of whom regard council permission the way they regard the idea of leaving, as something that applies to other people. There is an artesian bore pool in Lightning Ridge, maintained at a constant 38 degrees Celsius. People soak in it at all hours of the day and night. It is the social centre of a town that has decided to do things its own way, and has been successfully doing so for over a century. Number 3. Birdsville, Queensland. Birdsville has approximately 115 permanent residents. In September, when the Birdsville races are held, the population swells to 8,000 or more. Then the crowd leaves, the dust settles, and Birdsville goes back to being what it actually is most of the time: the most remote, permanently inhabited town in Queensland. Getting to Birdsville requires either a flight into the small airport or driving the Birdsville track, 177 kilometres of unsealed road through the Tarari Desert, connecting Birdsville to Murray in South Australia. The Simpson Desert sits to the northwest, 500 kilometres of parallel sand dunes that contain more dunes than the Sahara does in any equivalent area. The Birdsville Hotel, which opened in 1884, is one of the most famous pubs in Australia. It is famous not because of its cocktails or cuisine, but because it is there, in a place where almost nothing else is. Cold beer, accommodation, a dining room, which represents a level of civilization that anyone who has just driven the Birdsville track will tell you feels miraculous. The Big Red, the largest sand dune in Australia, at approximately 40 metres high, sits about 35 kilometres west of town on the edge of the Simpson Desert. Since 2013, it has hosted the Birdsville Big Red Bash, a music festival held in the desert. The idea of bringing tens of thousands of people into one of the most isolated places in the country to watch live music on top of an enormous sand dune is either the most Australian thing imaginable or evidence that the organisers have fundamentally misunderstood the concept of logistics. It works regardless. Every year it works. And every year, the people who drive 3 days through desert to get there say it is one of the best experiences of their lives. Number 2. Coober Pedy, South Australia. Coober Pedy is underground. Not just the mines, though there are thousands of those, honeycombing the earth beneath the town in a labyrinth that has never been fully mapped. The people are underground, the houses, the churches, the hotels, the art galleries, the bottle shops. Most of the social infrastructure of a town of around 2,000 people exists in caves, dug into the soft sandstone hills of the Stuart Range, 850 kilometres north of Adelaide, because the alternative is living in temperatures that regularly exceed 45 degrees on the surface. The underground homes are called dugouts. They maintain a constant temperature of around 22 degrees Celsius, regardless of what is happening outside. No air conditioning required. Quiet, dust-free, and immune to the flies that make outdoor life genuinely difficult between October and April. Coober Pedy means white man in a hole in the Arabana language, and the town lives up to the name in every possible direction. Opal mining began here in 1915, when a teenager named Willie Hutchison found opal while searching for water with his father's prospecting party. Today, Coober Pedy produces around 80% of the world's gem-quality opal. The surface surrounding the town is extraordinary. The entire landscape is covered in mullock heaps, white-grey piles of excavated earth from decades of mining, creating a terrain that has been compared to the surface of the moon and has served as the backdrop for multiple post-apocalyptic films. Mad Max, Beyond Thunderdome, filmed here. The landscape barely needed dressing. There is a golf course on the surface, where play continues after dark, using luminescent balls, because the temperature drops to manageable levels only after sunset. The course has no grass. Fairways are dirt and gravel. Greens are oiled sand. Players carry their own piece of artificial turf to tee off from. It is simultaneously one of the strangest and most practical sporting facilities in the world. Number 1. Farina, South Australia. Farina is a ghost town in the outback of South Australia's far north, roughly 26 kilometres south of Murray. On paper, that description makes it sound modest. Another failed settlement in a country full of them. But Farina is something else. Farina is a ghost town being voluntarily rebuilt, stone by stone, chimney by chimney, by a rotating crew of volunteers who drive out from Adelaide each winter, camp in the ruins, and spend their own money and time restoring a place that nobody lives in and nobody is likely to live in again. The town was established in 1878 as a wheat farming district, which in retrospect was an act of extraordinary optimism given that the annual rainfall here averages around 150 millimetres, and the soil is deeply hostile to crops. The farmers lasted about 20 years before most of them gave up. A small permanent population maintained Farina through the early 20th century via the railway that came through in 1882. Then the last residents drifted away in the 1950s. The buildings, constructed from local limestone and sandstone, began their slow return to the earth. The Farina Restoration Group began working on the site in 2009. Each year, between May and September, they come back. Walls are repointed with lime mortar. Collapsed sections are rebuilt using materials that match the original construction. Interpretive signage explains who lived in each building and what their lives looked like. A working underground bakery has been restored and produces bread during the volunteer weeks, which has become something of a destination for people making the Oodnadatta track run, walking through the restored ruins in the early morning, when the temperature is still cold and the sky is turning gold above the low ranges to the east. You feel the weight of every person who tried to build a life here and had to abandon the attempt. The silence is not empty. It is full of everything that was attempted and did not quite survive. Australia has been humbling human ambition for 60,000 years, and the country's interior keeps that record with the indifference of geology. Its centre is not empty. It is full of stories, and most of those stories involve someone deciding that this impossible, dangerous, breathtaking place is exactly where they belong. These 10 towns are proof that the instinct to stay, even when every rational and financial and physical argument says to leave, is one of the most stubbornly human things there is. The Outback does not reward that instinct with comfort, but it rewards it. If you made it this far, through all 10 towns and all that red dust and silence, you are exactly the kind of person who would survive Coober Pedy in January.